Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, December 28th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. We're actually starting with some Ukraine stuff. The U.S. is shifting its strategy on the Ukraine war. The U.S. and its European allies are quietly shifting their strategy in Ukraine from supporting Kiev's unrealistic goal of driving Russian forces out to encouraging a defensive posture with future negotiations in mind. And this was reported by Politico on Wednesday, citing U.S. and European officials. Something similar was reported a few weeks ago by the New York Times, saying that the U.S. was discussing this idea of getting Ukraine to focus on defense now that it's clear the counteroffensive has failed. And, very important context to mention is that the U.S. and its close NATO allies have discouraged peace talks throughout this conflict, and that includes in March and April of 2022 when a real peace deal was on the table. Russia was seeking Ukrainian neutrality. That was their main demand. According to the lead Ukrainian negotiator who recently confirmed this, that was Russia's only real thing that they wanted was Ukrainian neutrality, and they would have withdrawn from the territories that they've captured. But that was discouraged by the U.S. Boris Johnson went over there, told them to keep fighting, and the U.S. shortly after that declared that one of its goals in Ukraine was to weaken Russia, and then we started seeing these massive military aid packages getting passed. So now, after nearly 2 years of fighting, hundreds of thousands of people are dead, and Russia has made clear that any future peace deal must recognize the territory that it has annexed. The New York Times actually recently reported, this was on December 23rd, that Putin apparently has been signaling through diplomatic channels that he is open to a ceasefire that freezes the fighting along the current lines. So Putin, that's interesting. I haven't seen that reported anywhere else, just the New York Times. So hopefully that's true, and there is some work toward a ceasefire and a potential peace deal here. On the other hand, time is certainly on Russia's side. They see this war fatigue in the West, and this was always going to be more important to Russia than the U.S. and NATO. So Putin could certainly wait them out to get the terms that he wants for any sort of peace deal. So the Politico report said that U.S. and European officials are discussing deploying Ukrainian forces in a defensive posture instead of continuing the failed counteroffensive. The shift in strategy comes as both the U.S. and Europe are struggling to come up with more funding for the proxy war. Part of the Biden administration's long-term strategy is to help build up Ukraine's own military-industrial complex so the country is not so reliant on foreign aid. So the Biden administration has not publicly outlined this shift in strategy, but there are signs that the U.S. is thinking about winding this thing down, is thinking about changing its approach. One thing that we heard Biden, Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, lots of other officials say throughout this thing is, we will support Ukraine in this war for as long as it takes. But when Zelensky was recently in Washington, D.C., and President Biden held a press conference with him, Biden said that we will support Ukraine for as long as we can. So a very different commitment there than what they've been saying all along. And I think the lesson here is, for Zelensky, for Ukraine, is this: you had this war that was, the only way they could fight it, the only way the government could be propped up, which we'll get into in the next story, was support from the West, from the United States, from these outside forces who didn't really have an interest in, Ukrainian sovereignty. It's more just about, bogging down Russia. And for his part, Zelensky still maintains that that Ukrainian forces will drive Russia out, that is his war goal, is to kick them out of all the Ukrainian territory they've captured. That even applies to Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014. And I mentioned that recent Time magazine report when the magazine spoke with some aides close to Zelensky, and one of them said basically he's deluded himself into thinking that Ukraine can still win this thing. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian government workers will face salary delays without new aid. So Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sverdenko said Wednesday that Ukrainian government workers could face delays in the payment of their salaries or pensions if the U.S. and the EU do not approve new aid packages soon. She said, quote, "The support of partners is extremely critical. We need it urgently," end quote. So the U.S. has been funding the Ukrainian government with tens of billions of dollars through a form of assistance known as direct budgetary aid, which pays for government services and salaries and even subsidizes small businesses. But that aid has all dried up as Congress has yet to approve the over $60 billion that President Biden is seeking to fund the proxy war in Ukraine and prop up the Zelensky government. So the EU has been trying to push through a $50 billion euro aid package for Ukraine that would be dispersed over 4 years, but it has been vetoed by Hungary. They haven't been able to get it through. EU officials are set to meet on February 1st to discuss it again, and it's not clear if Hungary will approve it at that point. So Republicans are holding out. Republicans in Congress are holding out on approving the new spending on the Ukraine war until Democrats agree to significant changes to border policies and immigration laws. Negotiators in the Senate failed to reach a deal before the holiday recess. They're not returning till next year. And I really don't have any sense of when a deal might be reached, so I'm not sure when this aid is going to be approved, because unfortunately the Republicans are saying, Republican leadership at least, if they get what they want on the border, they'll give Biden the $60 billion for Ukraine. And Ukraine's deputy prime minister said that if the new aid is not approved soon, Ukraine's economy will be pushed into survival mode. Kiev may have to delay paying wages for 500,000 civil servants, 1.4 million teachers, and benefits for 10 million pensioners. So that's what our tax dollars have been funding in Ukraine, not just the military aid, but also the government services, pensions. I think a lot of people are not aware of that aspect of it. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. announces a $250 million arms package for Ukraine. So the Biden administration announced this new weapons package for Ukraine that the White House said will be the last one until Congress approves new spending for the proxy war. So this arms package uses the presidential drawdown authority, which allows the U.S. to ship weapons straight from U.S. military stockpiles. The Pentagon still has over $4.1 billion in PDA funds for Ukraine, but it lacks the funds to replenish the arms as U.S. stockpiles have been significantly depleted. They've been really strained by this policy of dumping all these weapons into Ukraine. And another thing worth pointing out is that this presidential drawdown authority funds that they have were created by the Pentagon discovering a so-called accounting error that overvalued previous weapon shipments to Ukraine. They said that error gave them an extra $6 billion to work with. And they've been using that for all the arms packages over the last few months. And without that error, they wouldn't have any of this money. So John Kirby, the National Security Council spokesman, he said last week that once this new arms package was announced, the U.S. would not have any more replenishment authority available. So according to the Pentagon, the arms in this $250 million package include munitions for the National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, air defense system components, HIMARS ammunition, 155 millimeter and 105 millimeter artillery rounds, TOW missiles, Javelin, and AT-4 anti-armor systems, more than 15 million rounds of small arms ammunition, demolition munitions for obstacle clearing, spare parts, medical equipment, maintenance, and other equipment. So the Pentagon also released a fact sheet that said the U.S. has provided or pledged over $44.2 billion in military equipment for Ukraine since Russia invaded in February 2022. Including other types of aid, the U.S. has spent a total of $113 billion on the proxy war, and Biden wants another 60 or 61 billion to fund it for another year. All right, shifting over to Gaza. Netanyahu refuses to discuss Gaza post-war plans. So according to Israeli media reports, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has refused requests from his top military and intelligence officials to discuss potential plans for a post-war Gaza. Israel's Channel 12 reported that Netanyahu rebuffed 3 separate requests from the heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, and the Israeli Defense Forces. An unnamed Israeli security source told Channel 12, quote, "Time is running out and decisions need to be made already about how to act with regard to all the relevant actors inside and outside the Gaza Strip. The Americans want explanations," end quote. In response to the report, Netanyahu's office said that he has instructed his top aides to prepare for preliminary deliberations on the matter. The news of Netanyahu's refusal to discuss the topic comes as Ron Dermer, who is Netanyahu's Minister for Strategic Affairs, is in Washington and due to meet with high-level U.S. officials to discuss the Israeli assault on Gaza. The U.S. and Israel have very different visions for a post-war Gaza, as the Biden administration is calling for a revitalized Palestinian Authority to take over, while Netanyahu has publicly rejected the idea, and he has said several times that he envisions a long-term, basically open-ended Israeli military occupation of Gaza. The U.S. and Israel are also far apart on Israel's current military operations in Gaza. U.S. officials have said they advised Israel to wrap up the current phase of the war, which involves the constant airstrikes and ground operations, to take a more targeted approach against Hamas leadership. But Netanyahu and other Israeli officials said the military operations are expanding in Gaza, and they vowed that the onslaught will last a long time. So far, the U.S.-backed Israeli massacre has killed over 21,000 Palestinians, including over 8,000 children, according to numbers from Gaza's health ministry, which are believed to be a low estimate. Netanyahu has an interest in continuing the onslaught as his political career is in peril due to intelligence failures that led to the October 7th Hamas attack on southern Israel. And the Israeli leader has also come under heavy criticism for his strategy of helping prop up Hamas to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state. Polling has shown that the majority of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign after the war. So this, I think, is important context because Netanyahu has every incentive to keep this thing going. And if you remember something I covered recently, he's trying to sell himself to his Likud party members for continued support. And the argument that he had is, hey, I'm the only one that can prevent a Palestinian state. And, you know, we're not going to let the PA take over in Gaza. I think that's probably part of his talking points as well, that he's not going to go for this plan. He says he's good at dealing with the Americans. He knows how to deal with them. You know, we don't have to worry about the things they're saying. All right, so the next one here, Erdogan says that Netanyahu is no different than Hitler. So Turkey's president has said Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is similar to Adolf Hitler due to the brutal campaign in Gaza. So Erdogan said, quote, "They used to speak ill of Hitler. What difference do you have from Hitler? They are going to make us miss Hitler. Is what this Netanyahu is doing any less than what Hitler did? It is not. He is richer than Hitler. He gets the support from the West. All sorts of support comes from the United States. And what did they do with all this support? They killed more than 20,000 Gazans," end quote. So Netanyahu fired back at Erdogan and accused the Turkish leader of committing genocide against the Kurds. Ankara has been at war with Kurdish insurgent groups seeking autonomy who are based in southeast Turkey, northern Syria, and northern Iraq. And this has been going on for decades. I was looking for a death toll when it comes to this conflict, and according to Reuters, the conflict between Turkey and the main insurgent group, which is the PKK, has killed over 40,000 people since the 1980s. So Netanyahu said, quote, "Erdogan, who is committing genocide against the Kurds and who holds the world record for imprisoning journalists who opposes his regime, is the last person who can preach morality to us," end quote. So you have Netanyahu here criticizing Erdogan for going after journalists. And I had to point out in the article that Netanyahu's campaign in Gaza has been the most devastating war for journalists in recorded history. And this is according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. More than 60 Palestinian journalists have been killed since October 7th. It's a huge number. Netanyahu also claimed in his rebuttal to Erdogan that the Israeli Defense Forces, which has killed over 8,000 children in Gaza so far, is the most moral army in the world. He also said that the IDF was fighting to eliminate the most abhorrent terrorist organization in the world, and claimed that Erdogan is, favorable of them, Hamas we're talking about here. And then one thing I mentioned is that, you see Erdogan and Netanyahu going at each other. Recently, they were on the same side in a conflict, and this was in Nagorno-Karabakh, which was an ethnic Armenian enclave inside, the internationally recognized borders of Azerbaijan. And this ended with Azerbaijan ethnically cleansing Nagorno-Karabakh of the over 100,000 Armenians who live there. And Turkey openly supported this, and they supported the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war when Azerbaijan captured a decent amount of territory that Armenia controlled. And Israel supported it by supplying weapons for both assaults, 2020. And there was a bunch of Israeli weapon shipments to Azerbaijan right before the assault in this past September, which was very quick. They basically, the Armenians in Artsakh, which is Nagorno-Karabakh, the government that was there was called the Republic of Artsakh. That's been dissolved. They had no way really to defend themselves at that point. They gave up pretty quick. So, it's just something I think worth pointing out when we see these two going back and forth at each other. All right. So the next one here, thousands flee widening Israeli assault in central Gaza. So this article is from AP, and it's just about the situation on the ground for people in central Gaza and in the south where things are really expanding. Thousands of Palestinian families fled Wednesday from the brunt of Israel's expanding ground offensive into Gaza's few remaining overcrowded refuges, as the military launched heavy strikes across the center and south of the territory, killing dozens. On foot or riding donkey carts loaded with belongings, a stream of people flowed into Deir al-Balah, a town that normally has a population of around 75,000. It has been overwhelmed by several 100,000 people driven from northern Gaza as the region was pounded to rubble. Because UN shelters are packed many times over capacity, the new arrivals set up tents on sidewalks for the cold winter night, most crowded onto streets around the town's main hospital, Al-Aqsa Martyrs, hoping it would be safer from Israeli strikes. Still, no place is safe in Gaza. Israeli offensives are crowding most of the population into Deir al-Balah and Rafah at the territory's southern edge, as well as a tiny rural area by the southern coastline. Those areas continue to be hit by Israeli strikes that regularly crush homes full of people. Israel has said its campaign in Gaza is likely to last for months, vowing to dismantle Hamas across the territory and prevent a repeat of its October 7th attack into southern Israel. Benny Gantz, a member of the country's three-man war cabinet, said the fighting will be expanded according to need to additional centers and other fronts. And Israeli officials are threatening more action against Hezbollah. We have a story about that. But this next one here is about Iraq. Biden says that he bombed Iraq to deter future attacks. So in a letter to Congress, President Biden said that he launched Christmas Day airstrikes in Iraq to deter future attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, but the attacks have continued since then. The Pentagon said the airstrikes targeted 3 facilities used by Kateb Hezbollah, one of the main Iran-aligned militias in Iraq, and it came in response to an attack on a U.S. base in Erbil that wounded 3 U.S. troops. The Iraqi government slammed the U.S. for carrying out the airstrikes, saying the bombings killed 1 serviceman and wounded 18 people, including civilians. So Biden said in his letter to Congress, quote, "On the night of December 25th, 2023, at my direction, United States forces conducted discrete strikes against 3 facilities in Iraq used by Iran-affiliated groups for training, logistic support, and other purposes. The strikes were taken to deter future attacks and were conducted in a manner designed to limit the risk of escalation and minimize civilian casualties, end quote. So we call them discrete strikes. I don't know how airstrikes can be discrete. So Al-Mayadeen reported that since the U.S. airstrikes were launched, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which is an umbrella group of Shia militias, has claimed 5 more attacks on U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. So 5 more just since Christmas. And there was an attack on Wednesday that targeted U.S. troops based in Erbil again. So the deterrence strategy is clearly not working. And Biden said the approximately 2,500 U.S. troops based in Iraq are there under the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. This is the AUMF that was passed in the wake of 9/11. On paper, U.S. troops are stationed in Iraq to assist the Iraqi government in its fight against ISIS. And that's a group that did not even exist in 2001 when the AUMF became law, and that's been used. Basically, it's an unlimited authorization for war across the Middle East, in Africa, and even in other parts of the world. It's been used. And Biden also claimed that he could bomb Iraq using authorities granted to him by the Constitution. Biden said, quote, "I directed this military action consistent with my responsibility to protect United States citizens, both at home and abroad, and in furtherance of United States national security and foreign policy interests pursuant to my constitutional authority as Commander-in-Chief and Chief Executive, and to conduct United States foreign relations," end quote. So since mid-October, there's been over 100 attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. The U.S. has launched several rounds of airstrikes. They always say they're meant to deter future attacks, but they haven't deterred anything. The situation continues to escalate. I'm surprised at this point that no U.S. troops have been killed yet. I know one of the ones that was injured in that attack on Christmas was left in critical condition, so I'm not sure if there's any update on that. All right, so the next one here, Israel warns that the window for diplomacy with Hezbollah is running out. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute, and it says a member of the Israeli war government says the chance for a diplomatic settlement with Hezbollah is getting low. The fighting along the Israel-Lebanon border is intensifying between the IDF and Hezbollah. The Lebanese militant group conducted its heaviest barrage of northern Israel on Wednesday. Senior Israeli Minister Benny Gantz indicated that Tel Aviv is preparing for a war with Hezbollah. He said, quote, "The situation on Israel's northern border demands change. The stopwatch for a diplomatic solution is running out. If the world and the Lebanese government don't act in order to prevent the firing on Israel's northern residents and to distance Hezbollah from the border, the Israeli military will do it," end quote. It's basically threatening invasion. Fighting along the border broke out after Israel began its historically brutal military operations in Gaza. Hezbollah says its attacks on Israel are to force the IDF to split its army between Gaza in the south and its northern border in Lebanon. On both sides of the war, civilians have been killed. The IDF is alleged to have committed a war crime by using U.S.-supplied white phosphorus in southern Lebanon and intentionally killing a Reuters reporter. So Gantz's comments, we've heard this from a lot of Israeli officials now, that if Hezbollah doesn't move back from the border, they're going to have to take military action. And you remember there was an Axios report that said the U.S. was concerned Israel was trying to provoke Hezbollah to justify a wider war in Lebanon. All right, so the next one here, Blinken is expected to visit the Middle East next week. This article is from Middle East Eye. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is expected to take a trip to the Middle East to discuss the latest developments in Israel's war on Gaza. And this is based on an Axios report. Blinken is expected in Israel late next week, and that his visit would also include trips to the occupied West Bank, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. So this would be the 5th time that he visits Israel since October 7th, again showing the deep U.S. involvement in this war. They keep saying they're expressing concerns about civilian casualties, about winding the war down, but Israel continues to expand everything and keep killing civilians. All right, so the last one here, Congress and the 4 faces of China baiting in 2023. So this article is from Blaze Malley at Responsible Statecraft, and it's basically just about the huge number of anti-China legislation that was introduced in Congress. It says the first session of the 118th Congress was one of the least productive in the body's history. Only 22 bills were signed into law this year by the president, by far the lowest total since at least 1993, the first year for which the National Archives have data. Despite the slow year, members nonetheless found time to introduce an abundance of bills related to the threat of China, which was the focus of hearings in committees ranging from financial services to the Judiciary Committee, and of legislation concerning everything from fentanyl distribution to TikTok. China is the new big boogeyman in Washington, D.C. So in 2023, members introduced 616 pieces of legislation that contains a variation of the word China, more than 3.5 for every day that Congress was in session on average. So one of the few things that Congress did this year was form this new committee on China, and this is in the House, and it's headed by Representative Mike Gallagher. Huge China hawk. They're just trying to be as tough on China as they possibly can be, and they are. And basically, after that committee was formed, bills targeting China's presence in economic, technological, military, and other fields were introduced. And none of these bills became law. It's important to point out, but it's just basically showing that they're just introducing they're just so focused on China now. And he goes through a few different types of legislation. There's legislation targeting foreign purchases of land in the United States. There's this whole narrative that China's buying up all the farmland. Even if you actually look at the statistics, foreign-owned farmland is already a very small number when it comes to the total farm acreage in the U.S. And then China, the amount that China owns is very small compared to other foreign countries. There's also bills that discourage diplomacy, others that increase the chance of war by just changing policies that there's really no need to change them. Little things like changing the name of the de facto embassy in Taiwan just to annoy China, basically. Things like that, needlessly antagonize China without accomplishing anything. So this is a big focus of Congress. And we see the Pentagon, other U.S. government agencies say, their official documents say that China is the number one threat to the United States and Russia is number two. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Gregory Shupak. Israel-Hamas war label obscures Israel's war on Palestinians. One from Patrick Eddington, the quaint FISA surveillance debate. One from Katrina Vanden Heuvel, Ukraine and the end of magical thinking. One from Michael Clare, the U.S. and China at year's end. And one from Trita Parsi, did Israel kill Iran commander to provoke a wider war? So that is everything. There'll be one more show this week, tomorrow. So I will be back before this weekend. Still feels like a quick week. And then again, Sunday is New Year's Eve. So I'll be working that day to put a show out for Monday for New Year's Day. It might be short. We'll see how much news there is. I'm sure there's still going to be stuff coming out of Gaza. There's no doubt about that. But I'm planning a normal week next week. Oh, I didn't even mention our fundraiser. We actually have finished. We've raised the number. We've raised our goal, but we're still asking. We're keeping the fundraiser at the top of the page. We're asking for more donations before the year ends. We could always use a cushion, but I want to thank everybody that's helped us out. It really means a lot. This is how we get by. We're entirely reliant on this support. So if you go to antiwar.com/donate and you want to make an end of the year donation that you could write off your taxes, please go do that. We really appreciate it. But that's it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.